And apologize for the last minute notice. I had no idea. I just got a phone call a few minutes ago and asked you to cover this slot. So if you're interested, feel free to stick around. If not, I will not be offended. But time is short. We're starting almost 15 minutes. Well, we're starting 15 minutes late, so I'm just going to let it rip. And hopefully some of you will enjoy it that decide to stick around. Thank you. So, quick about me. My name is Matt Scheurer. I'm a system security engineer with First Financial Bank. I'm also chair for the SimPA Security SIG. We're a local InfoSec meetup in Cincinnati. We meet up the third Thursday of every month. If you're interested, look on meetup.com and under the Tech Life Cincinnati group. I've also spoken at a couple DerbyCons and the 10th annual Northern Kentucky University Cybersecurity Symposium, and I've got a few certifications. So this is a really fun talk when we get all the boring stuff out of the way. So yes, I do have a day job, as mentioned in the previous slide, but the opinions expressed are solely my own and do not express the views or opinions of my employer. Quick legal disclaimer, the material presented is made available for information and educational purposes only. Use of these tools and techniques is at your own risk. The presenter, me, hereby disclaims any and all liability to any party or for any direct, indirect, implied, punitive, special, incidental, or other consequential damages arising directly or indirectly from any of these, or from any use of these materials, which are provided as is and without warranties. And so, really quickly, what is active defense? There's a good Wikipedia article on it. I'm just going to jump to the focus down in here, where it says, in the cybersecurity arena, active defense may mean asymmetric defenses, namely defenses that increase cost to cyber adversaries by reducing cost to cyber defenders. So, why active defense? Why are we here talking about this? Why is it a good subject? So, first and foremost, regarding which side of the debate you are on doesn't matter, because hacking back today is illegal. You know, what the future holds, I don't know. It's up for debate, and there's a lot of speculation there, and a lot of pros, cons, for or against, you name it. But number two, active defense is sort of the next level beyond honeypots, honey files, and honey nets. So, our objectives today are to first shield and protect legitimate users at all times. And we want to be very diligent about protecting innocent site visitors. Our second objective is to frustrate malicious threat actors attempting to steal and exfiltrate data through unauthorized access, preferably by unwittingly hacking themselves. And objective number three is exceed objective number one. So the presentation focus is going to be on active defense for a website, and we're going to do that by baiting and setting traps for script kiddies and other cyber criminals. A lot of inspirations for this. They come from all sorts of areas. So many years and many pounds ago, I used to do a lot of martial arts and studied a little bit of Aikido. I dabbled in it a little bit. I was not a serious practitioner of that particular form, but those principles and philosophies have stuck with me my entire life since that time. So using an opponent's energy or force against them is definitely one of the founding thoughts here. I'm not sure how many original thoughts my father has had in his life, but one of the best ones was how he would handle junk mail. So he would essentially get junk mail, he would take out the parts with his name, the attributable parts, and then he would basically email them back, or mail them back the rest of their own advertisement, so they would have to pay the postage both ways. I thought that was kind of clever. So in nature, from the opening slide, you notice some animals and animal defenses. Also nostalgia. Some of these things are things I remember from way back in the past, so long ago that I can't even really source some of them. But there's some new stuff here, but some of the old things are new again with active defense. Also a security-minded professional, and I'm still a prankster at heart. So the final thing is vigilante nature, so I love seeing the bad guys get what they deserve. It doesn't break my heart. So, some convention used in this talk is something I refer to as just kind of a hot water index. This is not a substitute for legal advice, but you'll get the idea that the escalating thermometer temperature indicates the greater potential for getting reported by hosting malicious content. So I kind of try to give you some guides, and you can pick and choose if you like any of these things or not. Make it related. So let's talk first about protecting legitimate users, which is our primary concern. So something I've heard talked about actually in 2 of the web talks here are a robots.txt file, also a Sitemap XML file, and one of the other things we want to do is our active defense content, we want to segment off really from our legitimate web content. So you want to use a link or a hyperlink checker just to verify that nothing contained in your active defense content is exposed to the internet. And we're going to talk about these things individually a little bit here in a moment. So the other thing we want to do is disable directory indexing on legitimate content. And we're going to talk about that where we want to just prevent that on legitimate content only. And then also we want to potentially protect ourselves by making use of authorized user-only messages. It may not help, but I doubt it can hurt. So, robots.txt files. There's a quick reference here. You can look up the command reference. But basically, we'll just kind of go through this a little bit here. So the first line tells essentially web crawlers where the Sitemap XML file is on our site. The user agent star means I don't care what web browser is hitting us or what web service is hitting us. We're going to say enforce these rules for all of these things. And so the disallows are all for our active defense content, which we're going to talk about as we work through this particular presentation. And just you know, some quick notes here. This is sort of dual purpose because this was the kind of things that will keep legitimate users out of the active defense content. It'll also shield it from showing up in search engine results and that kind of thing, which is very important. Again, utmost concern is protecting users at all costs. We talked about the Sitemap XML file, so I've got a site reference there that will sort of step you through that process. Here's an example, one that I have. Probably the biggest point of emphasis here is the location. I could specify multiple locations if I had multiple places. What this is essentially doing, though, is locking legitimate visitors and crawlers into the root directory in this case. And so it's very important for the legitimate content. This is what you want to define in here and never put your active defense content in this particular file because, again, we're trying to keep good people out of it. Directory indexing. So as a matter of good web security, disable directory indexing on all legitimate web content. So when somebody visits a folder, they can't see a dump out of a file list just being willy-nilly presented to them. The only exception to this, though, is going to be with our active defense content. In this case, we actually want the bad guys to find this stuff. This is very counterintuitive towards normal good web security practices, but you'll see there are definitely reasons for it. And so this is going to help ensure that those purposely ignoring borders and confines defined in a robots.txt file and Sitemap XML files find our active defense content. So in other words, we want the bad guys to kind of find this stuff. And there are certainly any number of tools that will do that, anything from wget with a switch to ignore robots, OWASP zap. I don't know if I'll have time for a quick demo. If I happen to, we'll throw one in at the end, but since we started late, unlikely we'll have time to do that in the interest of time. So I talked a bit about authorized users only. Here's something I stole from somewhere and kind of modified it for my own purposes for web content. Again, legally this may or may not protect you, it's hard to say, but as I said, it definitely can't hurt. It definitely leads credence to anybody saying, oh, I was accidentally harmed by visiting your stuff. Like, no, you intentionally went outside of the things we've defined. There's no direct links to this stuff on our site. There's nothing indexing it on a legitimate search engine. It just sort of is another thing to help you potentially. So we'll talk about what the active defense techniques are. So this one's a very simple one. I refer to it as the Roundtrip Roundkick. So the idea is that you take a bunch of unused DNS subdomain host records, you point it back to the loopback address. So essentially what happens is when you have bad guys automatically trying to hit things that may or may not exist on your site, the harder they think they're hitting you, the harder they're actually hitting themselves. And so I give some examples here of some good subdomains that you can try to use, the kinds of things that bad guys would try to look for, malicious threat actors. So if you're, obviously you can't use this if you're actually using some of these in real life, but you know, FTP, mail server, WordPress, things like auto-discover, these are all the things that, you know, popular subdomains that malicious threat actors will often use to try to recon what your site and, you know, or footprint rather, to understand what you have out there. And again, if they're trying to attack this stuff, you're pointing them right back to their own machine. So the harder they think they're hitting you, they're just hitting themselves really hard. So the second one is sort of psychological. And the idea is here that you're going to just kind of gross people out a little bit. So you want to stage an unreferenced folder. Unreferenced meaning that it's not linked to it on any legitimate content. With a fake door badge ID template, don't make it too close to the one that you actually use for work. It should look legitimate, but it should be distinguished enough and very different enough that it will clearly stand out as an imposter. You don't want to give away something too close to what you're really using for work. And then place gross out pictures of choice disguised as staff photo headshots. I personally have a very strong stomach. Not everybody does. I have a lot of friends who sort of think things are funny, like they've done, you know, you name it, Goatsy, Meat Spin, Tub Girl, you name it. They've done the most raunchiest, disgusting things you can imagine, and they think it's funny to trick people into going to those things. I actually I opted for people sort of vomiting because it will gross a lot of people out. But also, the first time I gave a preliminary version of this talk was in front of my boss, and I didn't want to end up talking to HR, so I did what I could. And I give an example here of a phony photo ID. And so you can see here's a sample of a badge ID template and a nice little Rickroll picture here that I selected from the things I did. But for the purposes of this slide deck, because nobody wants to see anything too gross before we actually eat Chipotle. Reflector Madness. This is a fun topic to cover. So the idea here is that we're going to create a folder that's actually easy to crack. And so the trick is once they crack it, they're going to be awful gleeful that they pop the folder. They're not going to be so gleeful when they see what's inside. It's not going to be what they expect. And before we look at that, so here's a sample of the htaccess file where it's password protecting the hashed out password value of the folder. These are all things internal to the web server. The bad guys can't get to them. But you see when you try to access the folder, you're presented with a username and password prompt. And I will let you guys know it's very weak. Does anybody want to fathom a guess as to the username and password on this folder? Admin is very close. You got the username right. Anybody want to guess the password? Password, yes. So admin and password should take somebody no time at all to brute force that. What they're probably going to see is that they get a connection refused type of error message like on the left. What they may actually see, though, is like something on the right. And this is just the default page. It could get a lot juicier. So what's inside the source code is a no borders iframe pointing back to the loopback address. And so if the attacker is actually running their own local web server on their own machine, they may actually freak out because why am I looking at my own website? Even better, if they don't really recognize what they've done in their web forms and they start trying to test against cross-site scripting and stuff like that, they're actually hacking their own web server at that point. So just a quick note here, I am not a web developer by any stretch of the imagination. I don't even play one on IRC, so the code snippets that you will see today, you'll probably swear, if I wasn't admitting to it, that it was coded by apes at the Columbus Zoo just minutes before I arrived. Moving on, so another active defense here is called Going Nowhere Fast. I've heard a good bit about WordPress today, and it's by far the most deployed content management system in the entire world, powering countless websites. Consequently, the WordPress login page is one of the most targeted for brute force attacks by malicious threat actors. I think most people here are going to realize that's true. In all fairness to WordPress, its reputation is probably worse than it actually is today. That's not to say it doesn't have issues and problems that surface and bubble up from time to time. Really, the big problem with WordPress are the plugins. And the fact that there are a lot of web developers that are really just sort of web designers, and they are big-time plugin jockeys. And so just imagine if you have, let's throw an arbitrary number. Let's say you have 20% of freely available WordPress plugins are vulnerable to something. If you have 10 plugins, then probably 2 of those are vulnerable. If you have 20, 30 plugins, now all of a sudden your attack surface goes up because now you have 4 or 6 vulnerable plugins. Sometimes these things bleed in the theme files as well, but by and large it's almost always the plugins that'll get you. And that's not an endorsement to not keep WordPress up to date. If you're running it, you absolutely have to do it. So this is sort of similar to before, where we're again prompted with a username and password. And this is a live WP login.php page. Anybody want to fathom a guess what the username and password is on here? Admin and password, you could try it. What will actually happen though? I'm sorry?
Your question doesn't matter.
And the answer is no, it doesn't matter. And the reason why is because this is a fake login page. There is no username and password that will actually grant you access. This isn't even really WordPress, but I'm using the file name, and then also sort of talking about it, I use some of the telltale files, so like the readme.html file that tells you the version of WordPress, the license.txt file, all of the directories from WP admin to WP content to WP includes are all there. The folder contents are modified, but the basic structure is there. So to an attacker, this sort of walks and quacks an awful lot like a real WordPress login page. And really it's just to get the bad guys tying up their own time and resources and energy trying to brute force crack something that can't be done. So this is an attack I refer to as pie to the face. And so there's a lot to unpack with this active defense strategy. So from disinformation to wasting attackers' time to potentially getting them banned from larger service providers to burning their CPU cycles and draining their batteries. So what we want to do is start by using enterprising cyber criminals' own cryptojacking techniques against them. It's very timely. I started working on this back in December when there were a few sort of token talks or mentions in the news cycle about cryptojacking and sort of compromised websites hosting JavaScript that would mine cryptocurrency on the back end. And it's sort of funny because there was a lull period where you didn't hear much about it, and all of a sudden in recent weeks, man, this is all over the news, where pop sites everywhere, particularly popular ones, are getting cryptojacking code loaded into the site, and it's sort of very newsworthy now. I didn't realize the impact when I first started looking at this. So the setup we're going to use for this is we're going to have a webmaster folder. And if you're paying really close attention to the robots text file, you'll notice that was in there as saying disallow. And we're going to have in a bookmarks.html file. If I'm trying to hack a web page, having the webmaster's bookmarks file is a gold mine. It tells me the stuff that they're using, the things that they're going to. That's really sort of what I want to focus on. In this case, though, what we're going to do is stage non-existent login account links for popular sites and services that the attacker might waste time attempting to brute force. So hopefully, whatever they trip for alert thresholds on these service providers, hopefully it has a place in resulting in them either getting outright banned or being reported to a threat intelligence feed. And sort of an interesting note about that is, so I could take malicious traffic and block it. I'm one site on the internet of countless ones. If the bad guys can no longer attack my site, they're just going to move on to the next target. And sort of in line with wasting their time is to ensure that they try to focus on things that can't really be attacked. And then behind the scenes, we're not actually mining cryptocurrency. I don't have that purpose in mind. I just want to tie up their CPU cycles and see if I can peg them out. And so I'm going to touch on why we wash, rinse, and repeat here. So But if you pull up the bookmarks.html file, what you see are links going to an email account that appears to have a username for Facebook, Google, LinkedIn, Microsoft, Live ID, Twitter, Yahoo, and I will tell you up front that those account usernames don't actually exist on any of those services. Again, this is very similar to the fake WordPress login where we want to waste the bad guys' time. We want them to spend time trying to brute force these things. Again, if I ban them, no big deal. If Google actually gets tired and bans you, you've got much bigger problems trying to do whatever you want to online. And so some quick interesting notes on some of these. I didn't spend a lot of time, maybe 10 minutes or less, trying to reverse engineer each of these. One for Facebook works flawlessly. Google, on the other hand, I could not figure out a string that would actually pre-populate the username field. But the idea is to just by having the name webmaster at cyber90.com, they're going to spend their time trying to crack this username that doesn't really exist. LinkedIn was an interesting one. It doesn't actually work unless you're already logged into LinkedIn. And what's really strange is you'll see yourself logged in and then it's popping you to re-enter your username and password. So sort of an oddball effect. Microsoft Live ID, actually the correct field should be username. The reason I changed it to email is, well, Microsoft is a company that's been around a long time. They go all the way back to the 1970s. Unfortunately, Microsoft Live ID login page also has a security model that goes back to the 1970s. And it will outright tell you if your username is bad. So, what an enterprising malicious threat actor could conceivably do is actually write a script to just do a simple URL call to find out valid user account names for Microsoft Live ID accounts. And it'll tell you whether or not the username is good or bad. Now, once you have a nice list of usernames, you could conceivably then just focus on trying to brute force crack the passwords, and you have half of the equation right there. I didn't want to put it out there where it would be really obvious when they click the link that, hey, this is a bad username. What's interesting is the resulting page has a link that lets you sign up using that email field, so it does process it, just not quite the way I'd hoped. Twitter works flawlessly, does exactly what you would want, and Yahoo also functions exactly how we would want. So let's talk about the source code in here on Pi to the face. So in the bookmarks HTML file, you'll notice I have a meta refresh, and usually you see a whole number there. I actually have 3.14 in honor of Pi. If you see a whole number there, it almost stands out a little more. Like you realize, oh, it's just reloading the page. You throw a decimal in there, it almost gets lost in the page content if you're not looking real close. And so when I talk about on the right side, you'll see why I'm doing a refresh there. I'm going to talk about that here in a moment. And then essentially right near the bottom of the web page content are these two JavaScript files that are completely identical. And what these JavaScript files are, I'm told it's an inefficient method for computationally averaging out and calculating pi. I actually want inefficiency here, so I'm happy to basically use this. And both files are identical. It's just put them in the source code at the bottom. I first started experimenting with some onload stuff. The problem I had there is it wouldn't render the page quick enough. It would actually go through the computations before it would present the content. I actually want the bad guys to sit at the bookmarks HTML file and keep that open while they look at it. The number of enumerations, I took pi and multiplied it times, I think, 100 million. And I tried 1 billion, but the problem with taking pi times 1 billion was that the page would report in the browser that it's taking an awful long time to load, and then ask if you want to close it. Now, I don't want to tip off the bad guys to sort of give them ideas and help them understand, like, hey, this is doing something I don't think it should be doing. So I shortened down the time, and that's why I put the meta refresh in here, so it does its calculation. It doesn't really warn the person, and then the page just reloads every 3.14 seconds. As you can see, the code itself that the web server is presenting is very small, but the impacts to the bad guys are that it will essentially, on a low-powered system like older hardware or on a VM which is a dual-core CPU, I've seen Weber demo this where they can spike the CPU all the way up to 100% using the same technique for cryptojacking that we're just using to harmlessly calculate pi hundreds of thousands of times. So on a moderately powered system, you can see spikes up to about maybe 50% or maybe a little bit less. So it's still decent in the sense that if they're already running at a heavy CPU load, they're going to feel some pain there when they do that. Particularly if they're running a web-based, sort of attack suite like Burp Suite to start to go after the site. These things are very resource intensive, and they're basically going to disrupt what the bad guys can actually do while that page is open. And they may not realize it because they may not actually take a look at what their CPU is doing. But the other sort of interesting note there is if you're running a high CPU load and the attacker is on a mobile device, like a laptop running on battery power, that's really going to draw a lot more power and drain their batteries a little quicker, just make it a little less convenient for them. So another active defense I want to talk about, I call it the wrong answer. This one starts getting into the very highest area where you could potentially get reported for posting malicious content. We're at the police academy today. I would almost be willing to bet a chicken dinner that by the end of the year, some drug user will call the police to inform them that they were trying to purchase illegal street drugs and they just got robbed. It's not real bright, but it happens. And the same might potentially happen to you. So again, just want to forewarn people that this could definitely get you reported. Potentially. I think you can probably fight and win, but it's really for you to decide. Talk to your legal department, talk to an attorney. I'm not one. But anyway, the setup here is that we're going to stage a file with an enticing name inside of an unreferenced folder. Again, something we're not linking directly to, that's excluded in our robots text file, that's not mentioned in our sitemap. And we're going to give it an enticing name, like an employee salary history XLS zip file. So whatever malicious threat actor is trying to exfiltrate data is going to think they've just hit a gold mine with this. And they're going to be inclined to get it. But really, this file is just a renamed version of the original infamous 42.zip. Some of you may know what that is, but if you don't know what 42.zip is, it's really a compressed file that is 42 kilobytes in size. Fully extracted, it will expand out to upwards of 4.2 petabytes of data. And consequently, most threat actors are not going to have a hard drive that large to handle the data. So I don't know if there are people in the room that are old school enough that they've ever had to recover a hard drive that is physically filled up all the way. Funny enough, Bill Semp was just talking about it in his talk. It's pretty painful. It's easier now than it used to be. I'm kind of old school, so I can remember popping drives out of one system, slaving them off into another, and then booting up, getting the data on the secondary drive, cleaning it up, and then shuffling it back into the other system and testing it before I put the case back on. And it's a little less painful now, but it's still definitely a pain point, and definitely will help the bad guys kind of wreck their ride. So then the last active defense I want to touch on here is something I refer to as Bobby Dropkick. Probably a lot of you have seen this cartoon. It's one of the more famous XKCD cartoons. It's called The Exploits of Mom. There's a reference to it there. But essentially it's a mom receiving a call from the school saying, we're having some computer problems, and it's your son's school, and oh dear, did he break something? And the school says, well, yeah, in a way. And the school asks, did you really name your son Robert Drop Table Students? And the mom says, oh yes, little Bobby Tables we call him. And the school says, well, we've lost this year's student records. I hope you're happy. And the mom says, and I hope you learn to sanitize your database inputs. So funny stuff, and it was actually directly the inspiration for this particular active defense. So the setup here is that we're going to stage a fake employee database dump file inside of an unreferenced folder. In this case, we've got a department's human resources folder that's an active defense folder we made just for this purpose. We're going to give it an enticing file name such as human resources, information systems, employee, MySQL database backup.zip file. I would recommend compressing it just to lighten the load on your web server. You could have the native SQL file out there if you prefer. This particular file was one I actually found on the MySQL Git repository. Somebody had actually put together a sample employee database with tons of fictitious data in it. It started off as multiple mini dump files. I just imported it as one big dump and then exported it out as one big dump file. But oh yeah, I did add a few things to it. Particularly not at the very bottom, but very close to the bottom, above the comments where you would have to scroll up on the page to probably see it if you were looking at it. So there's a little SQL code that's going to permanently wipe out the MySQL internal databases. And I started with my MySQL database, the sys database, performance schema. Information schema has some read-only content in there. It will eventually bomb out on this, I know, because I tested it. And my theory, I haven't actually vetted it out to prove it, but my theory is it gets so far it does probably remove some of the information until it can't because it's read-only portions, and then it just dies. But at that point, the damage has already been done. So if you've ever tried to recover your SQL databases, you really need to have backups of those. Because if you thought recovering from a full disk, full hard drive was bad, yeah, this is actually much worse. And actually, Bill Simp just talked about this when it happened in real life, where somebody deleted their database server. Yeah, once you lose the internal databases, that MySQL instance is pretty well wrecked. If you don't have backups, yeah, it's going to be a pretty tough day. And so it's kind of funny because a lot of times you see commentary from malicious threat actors posted anonymously, and oh well, you know, it's so-and-so's fault because they didn't have good patching and adequate backups. Well, let's find out how much they eat their own dog food there, because I remember a story from somebody who won a capture the flag event because at the time they were running Kali with the default root account and default password, and so the contestant essentially was hacking his competitors and grabbing their stuff. So yeah, oftentimes bad guys, they love to sort of, you know, poke their thumb in the eyes of defenders, but you know, a lot of times they are not prepared themselves. Good way to find out. So these are just sort of my thoughts and ideas and things that I kind of threw together. There's actually a different philosophy. Black Hills Information Security has a really cool distribution called ADHD, which is the Active Defense Harbinger distribution. SANS actually has a SEC 550 class that's based on that particular distribution. I have not taken it, but it looks like good stuff. And again, Black Hills Information Security kind of does things a little bit differently. A large part of what they're doing is doing things that revolve around canary tokens and basically phoning home, so you can actually really understand where the data ultimately ends up and sort of use that for your own threat intelligence information. My particular stuff, I really am not trying to get somebody in trouble or report them or whatever. I just want them to kind of feel a little bit of immediate pain and maybe rethink their life choices a little bit and not serve time in the process. But it's a different product, and it's definitely worth a look. So I do recommend giving it a look if you're maybe not quite into the things I'm presenting, but still want to do something actively. So yeah, criticisms for this stuff, I've received a few. So one individual that is a really good friend of mine thought that I was making a mistake by making the Reflector Madness so easy to crack. Thought I should make it a lot harder. Well, the good thing is you're in control. You set credentials on there. You can make that username and password whatever you want. Make it as challenging or as simple as you want. There's no right or wrong here as far as I'm concerned. So another thing is this would make it difficult for a legitimate penetration test because you've got all these active defense stuff and we're trying to really test the security. Well, hopefully you're doing something along the lines of a wider gray box engagement where it's not just a completely they come in blind, not knowing anything about the environment. And again, because you've taken the time to vet out your robots and sitemap files, you should be able to offer that as documentation, provide some guidance, so that they don't waste their time or mess up their own systems trying to sort of find this stuff. And then some other expressed concerns. So somebody told me, hey, we're not going to implement this. It might really tick off some skilled attackers and vindictive types. So one of the problems today, and I've read actually a number of articles on this recently, is that malicious threat actors, they're mostly undeterred today. And the reason why they're compromising vulnerable systems is because they simply really fear no retribution or retaliation for the stuff they're doing. In other words, they're not feeling any pain. So if I have no consequences, why would I ever stop hacking these websites? If there's a monetary benefit to it, or getting nation-state sponsorship or whatever have you, and sort of one of the things I'd like to point to is the fact that Brian Krebs is still alive today. For any of you that have followed Brian Krebs for some time, you know that the bad guys have tried to take him out through various schemes and mechanisms and so forth. He's still alive today. I'm pretty sure doing this stuff would be much lower on their list of people to hit than anything that Brian Krebs has done with regards to exposing these malicious threat actors, calling them out by name, showing the attribution he has, and essentially getting them arrested. And the other interesting thing, and I actually have a little bit of a law enforcement-ish background in the distant past, but I found that ultimately people that are willing to fight back, the attackers ultimately do respect them a little bit more. So just some potential answers to that. But if you're still really super concerned about it, I'm just here to give you guys an informative, educational talk on active defense stuff. There's nothing that says you have to use this. Just throwing these ideas out there. So, any questions on anything to this point? Anything I presented? Yes?
Who is Brian Krebs? I've never heard of him.
Okay, so Brian Krebs, he was a writer for the Washington Post, and he would do a lot of their security content, and he had a pretty good following there. He left the Washington Post, I believe it was around maybe 8+ years ago, and he started his own information security blog, KrebsOnSecurity.com. Krebs, K-R-E-B-S, on security.com. And it's definitely a site that I highly recommend probably everybody in this room read on a regular basis. He does a really good job of, as a reporter, understanding the technology and understanding the underpinnings and explaining things in a level that you can appreciate as a technical professional, but they're also, in many cases, explanatory enough that you can give them to somebody that's less technical in a more management type of position. So it's a little bit easier to digest than your typical InfoSec white paper. And also, he really has done a lot of great investigative reporting on bad guys. He authored a book called Spam Nation, which is definitely worth reading. If you have any doubts that a lot of the stuff is coming from Russian and Eastern European, a lot of these phishing, mal spam campaigns are coming from that region. Read his book and draw your own conclusions. Any other questions? All right, well, I definitely don't want to hold anybody up for lunch. So, real quickly, again, Matt Scheurer, there's my Twitter handle. If you're so inclined, you're not following it currently, please do. Also, right now, these slides are live on SlideShare, so slideshare.net/circa, and you can find the content out there. And with that, again, I want to hold you up for lunch, so we'll go ahead and wrap it up, and thank you, everybody, for coming.